When the economy collapses, it'll look like this. People will run on the banks. Human fear kicks in. They're hearing recession, not soft R economic crisis. They're hearing hard R, R-rated, worldwide recession, starting here in our own backyard. So what do? They go to the bank and they pull out all their money. Happens every single time. It's the same thing that happened with toilet paper in 2020, except when people hoard toilet paper, we're basically fine. Like, I don't know, use a rag or something. When people withdraw and hoard all of their money, banks collapse and close lines of credit. This is when banks start hearing that hard R being yelled in the distance. Recession, panic absolutely sets in. All their cash is being withdrawn. That's their lifeblood. Cash is the lifeblood of banks. They need it. They need our cash. So this means they either need bailouts or they're gonna bust, like right now. The ones that do manage to survive, they take zero risks and they start closing up their lines of credit. This means they're not gonna be helping anyone pay their debts. They got their own debts to worry about. They're not gonna help you, they're not gonna help me, and most importantly, they're not gonna help any businesses. But why care about debt? Well, most big businesses around the entire world either need debt to survive or they have massive debt payments they need to make each and every month. Miss a month, it's not a good situation. Businesses start to sink. As lines of credit close up and people become terrified of spending their money, businesses, they just have to fail. They can't pay for their debts, their rent, anything. They hang on as long as they can, they try, but slowly the recession begins eating them alive, picking them off. The weakest first, the strongest, they might survive, but the weakest are gone. Just like people without savings, businesses without reserves of cash, they go under. The recession is brutal, amoral, and strikes without mercy. That mom and pop grocery store that the whole town loves, yeah, they're finished. The massive publicly traded company that took a big risk on some expensive equipment last year, sold for parts.
Bankruptcy!
Your buddy's new truck that costs way more money than he makes, it's repoed. For businesses, this is a living nightmare. It's their duty to survive any way they can. They need to figure out a way to keep the doors open. When they have no cash and no customers, that's a hard problem to solve. So what do? What would you do in their position? Businesses start cutting jobs. You thought it couldn't get worse, but this is life. Things can always get worse. Just ask Disney. To survive businesses, they have to start cutting people's jobs. It's your salary or your manager's. So guess what? You're on the firing line. With businesses burning through their, break glass in case of emergency cash, every single non-essential job, that's cut. Anything exploratory, that's cut. Anything that could potentially be done by, that other guy who's slightly more productive, that's cut, which means millions of people losing their jobs and a bunch dying, just like Brad Pitt said.
Every 1% unemployment goes up, 40,000 people died.
This is where the hard R recession terror starts to reach its apex. Unemployment is everywhere. It's inescapable, striking everyone you know. And our old friends, the media and YouTubers, they're busy telling everyone how bad this recession is, how you need to prepare, how you should, hide and scream, spreading more fear, spreading more panic, feeding the cycle of running on the banks, collapsing businesses, losing even more jobs, making the entire economy worse and worse. And the scary thing is, the economy only works because we all collectively agree that, hey, this thing's working. We should trust this thing. As soon as that trust is gone, it's every man for himself. The delicate pieces here, they just fall apart as soon as that trust is gone. But remember, it can always get worse. And of course it does. Inflation has entered the chat. We've all been working together very successfully to just tank our economy. Something else has been in play though, behind the scenes. Big bad inflation. We're all familiar with it right now, and like fear, this feeds the recession too. As operating costs go up, businesses, they're forced to increase prices. But as prices increase, people begin spending even less. It's this chicken and egg scenario where no one wins because no one has money, and the businesses need to make money to keep the doors open, to keep the people employed, to then pay for the products. And on top of all of this, you've got real estate prices tanking, construction projects just abandoned, and central banks just tweaking interest rates like it's the economy's nipples trying to get this sinking ship figured out. Terrible analogy, but for a lot of people, by this stage, the ship is just underwater. Like, where do you even go from here? Homelessness increases, financial strain on households, skyrocketing unemployment, and generally unstable cash flows means a lot of people, they just can't afford rent. Mortgages, that's just, you can't even think about that, but rent, they can't even afford that. They're put on the street, which is terrible. But despite having, very little money to spend, many people resort to drug use to help deal with the stress of the world falling apart. Not a great use of money, but can you really blame them? Like, life sucks at this point. There's no prospects. Why not watch the world burn with a smile on your face. Slowly, this begins to spread throughout America, turning every city into Portland, Oregon, which sounds awful. But this is just the first act, because now the recession's about to go global. The recession goes on a world tour. No country operates alone. Everyone trades and lends with one another, but one country is more linked and more relied upon than any other: the United States. When America collapses, it takes everyone else with it. The recession spreads worldwide quickly. There's two reasons why when America collapses, everyone else goes down with it: debt and the dollar. Hear me out here. The US has trillions of dollars of debt that it pays to other countries and private investors all around the world. Many of them need and depend on this money. But why? Because typically the US is a reliable country to lend money to. You lend, the US basically pays back on time and what they said they were going to pay back. If that fails, if the US economy collapsed, that reliable income, that's gone. Not only that, but supply chains around the world begin to falter, then fail as US businesses go under. As their customers and clients around the world get hurt, everything is this self-fulfilling, self-propelling downward spiral into the ground where no economy is left, and then I don't know where we go from there. But the recession amplifies. You remember 2008? America started the economic crisis, but it impacted the entire world, and in many cases it affected them even more than it affected the United States. So we have this hard R economic collapse just pending in the distance, looming. We keep hearing about it, we're afraid of it. We never really know, okay, what happens after the collapse? That's why I wanted to make this video. But this whole situation, it takes a much more scary turn than all of this chaos that we've talked about. And that has everything to do with this: the dollar, the US dollar. The whole world believes in the value of this. What happens when they don't? In a deep recession, that's when we all find out. As the US starts to collapse and default on its debt, as it stops being the pinnacle of productivity and business around the world, faith in the dollar goes down. The value begins to drop, which will suck pretty bad for basically everyone. The dollar is the go-to money for international trade. Failing countries, they even use the dollar to replace their own defunct currencies, when they have inflation go through the roof and they're like, this is worthless, let's use the dollar. Bigger countries, they hold the US dollar in reserve. China, for instance, they have trillions in foreign exchange reserves, a huge amount of that being in US dollars. Are you getting the picture of how interconnected this is? America doesn't just rely on the dollar. Almost everyone does. This is where the recession truly spreads. This is where things get really bad. And what kind of reality does that create? The world becomes ugly. As this US-born recession spreads, people start pointing at the country responsible, the US. International relations, they sour, failing economies, flare up old rivalries, warfare, who knows? That seems to be pretty easy to start these days. But there are other more silent and sinister effects. As unemployment lingers, the workplace becomes less skilled, wounding countries for years and slowing down recovery. You don't really hear about this part, but you can't just put people out of work for 3 years and then expect them to come back as skilled as they left. It just doesn't work that way. Our skills, they atrophy. We're this pinnacle of progress right now, but we're not that far off from just that thing being set back a significant degree. So when the world becomes a ghost town of unemployment, fear, and uncertainty, political tensions, they increase. As people need to vent their growing frustration and resentments, the United States becomes even more divided. Civil war? Unlikely, but you never know. Like Texas, they might just break off. They've threatened it enough. The recession, it's left its mark. And the world will be an ugly place for a while everything settles and, a new order gets established. And that's the only sliver of, hope here. I'm gonna discuss this in a second, but the house of cards has fallen and we're all in it. We're here for the ride. But if we just slow down for a second, because that's worst case scenario. Sure, a lot of the individual details are likely and they've happened before, like in the 1870s and then again in the 1930s and then 2008. Seems to happen kind of a lot. But if economics shows us anything, it's that the global economy is a crazy place, and doom and gloom almost always seems worse than reality. In 2008, many Europeans thought that the savage recession we were having would cause the EU to break up, but it didn't. And weirdly, it's not all bad during an economic collapse. Sure, a lot sucks, but surprisingly, crime seems to go down. And the dollar would most likely survive and then end up stronger than any major currency once everything is said and done. It's called the dollar smile theory. And let's not forget the fact that people and businesses who plan ahead will not only be fine, but they'll also end up making even more money as they'll be able to pick up even more assets and market share for cheap because all of the poor competitors are just gone. It's just there for grabbings. So there's a silver lining for the people who are smart and who prepare. The sky might fall, but it doesn't mean it has to crush you. Because for every big downturn, there are certain people who amass absolute fortunes. Anytime there's major change, there's someone making a whole lot of money. And this is why making a habit of planning ahead and consistently investing in the market is so important. You don't have to think that much. You could use a strategy like dollar cost averaging, which just simply means you decide how much you're gonna invest every week, and then you just do it, like it's your religion. You don't even think about it. This means you capitalize on the market when it's up, or when it's down, especially when it's down and prices are cheap. If you invest this way, you really don't even need to pay attention to the media or the markets or the economy because, hey, you're investing either way. It's simple, it's easy. The most important advice though is to start today. Don't wait for the crash and then go, then I'll invest. It's gonna be too late. Think about it. Are you more likely to make a solid financial decision right now when you're in a pretty good place or when the world is collapsing? You know, probably now. Let's be honest. To buy stocks, I use and recommend Webull. Super simple, easy to use app. They actually even give you a whole bunch of free stocks when you sign up. I put the link in the description of this video. Webull also has automatic investing features that will just dollar cost average for you. So like you can set this up and then you don't even have to think about it again. So most likely, when the economy collapses, it'll suck, like pretty bad. But it also might be the greatest opportunity of your entire life. The only question left is what you should invest in. For a tantalizing idea, check out this video on screen.